Hello and welcome to a very special episode of Mixer. Today we are joined by Rennie Pilgrem, an exceptionally talented guest. Credited with pioneering the new school break genre, his career spans over 30 years, having been part of the group Rhythm Section and also owning his own record label, Thursday Club Recordings, which is argued to have been the most important in the world for Breakbeat. Meanwhile, his performance as part of the TCR All-Stars is also considered as one of the top 100 Glastonbury performances ever. The list goes on and on and on. I could really talk my whole self just going off that list, but it's great to have you on. And I suppose just within that, the scale of what you've achieved and done in your career, it would be great to hear where it all started.
Sure. Thanks for having me on your podcast. Where did it start? It started, I guess, for me. My father played a lot of jazz and was a trumpet player. Not a professional, but he was very good. So I guess I grew up listening to jazz, then I started playing the saxophone. And where I grew up in Kent, there were very few saxophonists. So I started to have, I guess you'd call them soul boys back in the day, kind of funk bands, kind of finding me and asking me to join their bands and stuff. So I played for various funk bands around the Kent area. Then didn't really do much until I started hearing house music. Started trying to make house music with a friend of mine, Richie T, in East London. And then we met a guy called LSD, a DJ, and he started playing us. It didn't really have a name at the time. It was just part of the rave scene, but it was basically breakbeat made at house speed. So hip hop beats, funk beats with dubby bass line. So it became a whole new genre that obviously took off hugely in the rave kind of early 90s in Britain. So that was my start.
Awesome. That's amazing. I mean, when you mentioned that you started making house music, or you started hearing house music rather. What about that made you think, oh, I want to be a part of that?
I think so. There was a double album that came over from America called something like the Detroit sound of underground, the underground techno sound of Detroit or something. And I think back then techno wasn't that different to house, and it just sounded very different to anything that had come before. It was like it sounded like the sound of the future. I guess the sound. I guess it wasn't a million miles away from kind of what Kraftwerk were doing in the 70s, but there was a gap from the 70s to like the early 90s, and suddenly this very underground sounding music came out that basically, if you hear something new, you either hate it or it's exciting, or you might hate it at first and then you get into it. So for me, it sounded very fresh and I liked it. And then when I heard it being where the four on the floor kick drum was replaced by breakbeats, then I really, really liked it because it kind of had a link to the music I really liked growing up, which is kind of funky beats, James Brown, Prince, that kind of stuff. So yeah, it was a very exciting time.
Yeah, I can totally imagine. Because growing up for me, that music's always been present. Not specifically that type of genre in my sort of vicinity, but just electronic music in general in that way was always quite prevalent. And I think the fact that you were witnessing the sort of evolution of music right before your eyes is definitely quite an exciting thing. Because correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm hesitant to say that type of evolution has really happened recently.
You think recently? You mean it's fairly recent that it occurred?
No, I mean more so like in terms of the way that break came about. There's not really been a genre that recently that I can think of that's.
I think it was the biggest thing since punk as far as disrupting everything. It disrupted record labels because, for instance, as Rhythm Section, we made a track, we pressed up vinyl and put it out, and suddenly we were our own label. We had huge companies like EMI asking us to sign for them, but they couldn't actually compete with underground artists and offer them enough. Or they certainly didn't offer us enough. They didn't have a network where they could kind of sell 10, 15,000 copies of a 12-inch, whereas the underground record shops could do all of that. So it was a massively underground scene. Punk was about anyone can make music, but the sort of rave scene and the underground music scene was anyone can make music and anyone can release it. So as soon as you needed just a computer and a sampler and a keyboard, you had enough to make kind of broadcast quality music. So it was a massive thing, and there hasn't been anything like it since. There may not be again because everyone's so linked and the internet. As soon as there's a new scene, then it's everywhere rather than taking
Yeah.
years to develop. So it was the last huge movement, really.
That's awesome. That is awesome. So to be a part of that
Yeah.
is really cool. And it's interesting how your journey worked in that way, and the fact that you obviously started off in the funk bands and the saxophone, and you then it just so happened that it took you along that route, that going through that evolution as part of
Mm.
it is really cool. Like, you weren't like a bystander listening to it, like you were part of it, which is really, really cool.
Obviously, as you know, I make art now as well. But doing an art show that I was doing, it was interesting because I met a kind of a 20, maybe in their late 20s, a couple, or maybe even a bit earlier. And they were talking to me about the rave scene. And it made me realize that basically my generation, it was how we would look upon the 60s as being this huge, massive thing that went on. And
Yeah.
I was too young for that. And I think people see the 90s as this huge explosion of hedonism and music and all sorts of things. So I was lucky to be part of it and kind of in the right place at the right time.
No, that's really, really cool. I like that. And I think as well, also, what defines that period of time, in my mind anyway, is the fact that there was that explosion of expression, but it was done in a way that wasn't monitored. It wasn't
No.
publicized in the way that things would be now. Like, everything is broadcast. And it's
Mm.
like the fact that you could have that experience without it being broadcast in that way. Like you were saying, like, it's hard to think if another situation like that will come about
Mm.
because of the way things happen. No.
Well, obviously, at the start of it, people would find out about parties just by text on their phone, and they were known as
Yeah,
orbital raves because they were on the outside of London, and people would get hold of
that's
an empty
class.
warehouse and put their own sound systems in. So the whole thing was very alternative, but it became huge. And then it became a big problem for the government because come down hard on people throwing rave parties because no one was drinking, because they were taking ecstasy. No, what they were drinking water. So the breweries were losing millions every weekend. So they kind
Wow.
of that and the greed of some of the people putting on parties. But
Yeah.
basically, the breweries got Thatcher to pass an anti-rave bill. I don't know whether you remember it,
Wow.
but they banned repetitive beats being played. All these young people are drinking water as if that was a crime. So yeah, pretty mad.
That is nuts.
Yeah.
That is nuts. Wow. And did that stop anyone, or did it just go more underground after?
Yeah, it did stop because the raves were banned, and I guess people on some huge event and get it cancelled. But the other weird thing as well, and this is something that people have spoken about a lot, and I can't say for certain that it's true, but it sounds true, that at the same time, the IRA used to control cocaine into Britain, and no one was taking cocaine because they were all taking ecstasy. Doctored some batches of E's to scare people of taking ecstasy so that they would go back to taking clubs. So the music went back to
Mhm.
clubs and people went back to taking cocaine instead of ecstasy. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's a good story.
But no, definitely, definitely is. I mean, it's not unbelievable.
No.
But it's interesting then, I suppose, because it's that is kind of where it's at right now. I would say it's kind of stayed in the clubs.
Yeah.
I think one example that sort of maybe branched back into that era was lockdown. I think I got added to a few group chats, and I never actually went to one, but there was a few, there was loads of underground stuff.
I saw that, and it was interesting because it was the closest you could get to the raves, because if you're in a space where it's technically illegal and it doesn't feel mainstream, then you feel more special and it's more exciting. So
Mm,
I think I saw some of that, and it did look like, did remind me of that. Yeah.
that's interesting. Do you think there's a way back?
I think there'll always be movements, but what it'll be, I don't know whether you have a music style movement. Same as, when high streets are shops are closing down, and or they're
Yeah.
very boring generic shops, then
Mhm.
little indie shops doing small things that are cool are probably the way forward to save all that sort of thing, and fight, sort of have life in cities where you can obviously otherwise get everything online. So things being niche and stuff probably will be a thing.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's really, really interesting insight. So we were talking about your career, your journey,
Yep.
and you mentioned that you started listening to house. You then started to explore it a bit more and create it with the people that you were meeting because it sounded like the sound of the future. You said then, so you're in that situation. Then what? What's after that?
So Rave became uncool because it became very commercial as a sort of music. People started doing sort of novelty rave tunes, and so it died fairly quickly, and breaks disappeared. And then for me, I did a I pretended I could DJ because I couldn't DJ at that time. We were just doing live things. And
Yeah,
I ended up doing a gig and did a gig to a couple of thousand people as my first ever DJing gig, and blagged it. But TCR doing probably more the original, like the original speed of house, about 130 BPM, and suddenly there became a whole, what they called the new school break scene, that we had a club called Friction that played it, and it was after Big Beat had become a dirty word, and suddenly there was this new breakbeat sound. Started a second career of breaks doing, as TCR had maybe 10, 15 different artists. It was a great way to see different countries and meet fans of that sort of music.
no, that is a really, really cool experience. And did you find then it's just fascinating to hear how you're watching the evolution of music. It's like how one genre's cool, then the next genre's a bit more popular than that. It's like you're literally witnessing an evolution of it. Whereas it's like kind of now everyone's got their own sort of likes and dislikes, and
Hmm.
it doesn't quite progress in that way now, I think, which is really cool. And would you say then it was quite an experimental time for you in your career, the way that you were creating?
It was exciting and it was experimental. I mean, to be honest with you, most dance music becomes formulaic,
Mhm.
because if it's a dance track, it has beats at the beginning and the end, so the DJ can mix it, and it will have, if it's breaks, it would have kind of a breakdown a couple of minutes in, and then same thing maybe at 4 minutes or something. So it is, and it was experimental, but when you're making just dance, it is formulaic, because there's certain
Mhm.
things that people expect. But the whole thing of
Sure.
the art of DJing has changed now, where if you're using things like record box, where it's almost like you've sorted out the tracks so that they will
Mhm.
play pretty much in time, takes away a bit from the art of DJing. But on the other side of the coin, you can become much more creative, looping stuff and experimental, but it does become a formula.
Nice. No, thank you. Did you ever, when you were DJing at the time, were you DJing with vinyl
I was, yeah.
or yeah?
I was DJing with vinyl, and then I was an early adopter using CDs. A few of us got invited to go to the Pioneer HQ outside London, and was shown literally by these
Wow.
Japanese dudes in white coats, showed a Pioneer CDJ and asked to play
Wow.
with it and see what we thought. And then we got given one.
That's a story that
Yeah, no, that was good. And to be honest, it suited me better. I struggled with vinyl. I struggled with mixing with vinyl, but CDJs suited me more. And then obviously now it's using a USB with the stuff in there, so it's kind of gone to another level. But I'm not obsessed with the technology.
yeah, yeah, no, that makes sense. That's really cool that you were asked to come out
Mm.
and almost see like the first iteration of that
Yeah,
because
that was
yeah,
crazy.
obviously it's Yeah, that is they're so commonplace now, so the fact that you'd been there, like, for the
Yeah.
first sort of
Well, I've really witnessed vinyl sort of morphing into CDs disappearing,
yeah,
and now obviously USB. But then also you've got apparently John Lewis had just said they're going to stop vinyl. So vinyl's come back,
yeah,
albeit in a different way, more of a
yeah,
collector's thing. But that's nice
yeah.
to hear, I think.
But yeah, for sure. Someone I had on in the studio space a couple of weeks ago, he had started his own record shop, and the sort of thinking behind it. I mean, he doesn't run it anymore, but
Mm.
he had it for a couple of years, and his thing with it was the social aspect for the fact that rather than it being somewhere like a pub or a club or a bar,
Yeah.
it's like you still got that music, but it doesn't need to be quite as full on.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know.
Yep. That's good.
Yeah, for sure. Because I think it's a really cool part of society that was forgotten about quite like, not briefly, but it was kind of, like, pushed aside, and the fact that it's coming back, I
Oh
like a
yeah,
lot.
definitely.
What were you trying to achieve by creating your record label when you made it? Was there a goal you had in mind?
Well, really, when back then, if you release a record yourself, then distribution sorted out, then it's very easy to then release other people's stuff because you know who you use to master it and you've got a company who distributes it. So it's very easy to then let other artists use those avenues. So my thing was, do I think I've got good taste in music? Yes. Can I spot tunes and people I'd like to work with and tunes I'd like to release? Yes. And then have some good people working for you. So it was quite easy really, because you could, if you heard 20 tunes and one you thought this is good, then you could release it. So it was, I guess the idea was to have a label to release my stuff and then release other people's stuff through it, get the name, get the TCR name out there, and get a bit of a family of like-minded people. Again, for maybe, trying to think, maybe 15 years, it worked very well. It's great.
Nice.
I think the fly in the ointment was, unfortunately, when things went digital, let's say Napster time, then record sales just disappeared overnight because mainly just DJs that bought it. And obviously
Yeah.
DJs want upfront music.
Mhm.
Once you were playing on CD and people got hold of the digital files, then they would be uploaded or they'd be on Napster. And then it was kind of the end of the music industry as we knew it. And unless you were happy or wanted to be a DJ, there was no way of making money out of music anymore. So that
Mhm.
was bit of a big thing for music, really. So
Yeah.
because you could earn a reasonable living if you released a record every month and sold 2 or 3 thousand copies and made £2 or 3 thousand, you were earning a living. And if you were
Yeah.
gigging as well, so that literally went, which was pretty sad, really, because then you've
Yeah.
got, funny enough, the guy who started Napster is now on the board at Spotify, and artists
Mhm.
don't get paid anymore. It's all
I know,
changed.
it is a fascinating evolution in that way, and it does make you wonder if the way we have it now, although it's extremely convenient, is that really the best?
It will change quite quickly because Spotify are using AI to produce whole tracks. So fictitious artists will be releasing AI generated music in its entirety so that they don't have to pay artists or labels. People realize that they're listening to kind of very similar sounding stuff that hasn't been made by people. They will find underground alternatives which will spring up, and people who are kind of into music will find that. And there's places like Bandcamp, which is where I release my music now, which cut out all of that.
Yeah.
So hopefully there'll
Yeah.
be a reaction against that.
Yeah.
Someone's not going to want to
Alternatives, yeah.
listen to a fictitious rap algorithm has trawled from the internet. So it will
Yeah.
change, definitely.
Yeah, that's really twisted, I think. I think as well with the vlogging side of things, like people who are YouTubers, I saw Google had created fake vlog people, so, like, someone someone could be on a YouTube video and the whole thing, like a product unopening or a makeup tutorial, was all just entirely fake. Does that worry you?
Someone you're seeing as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
can you
yeah.
tell? Can you tell?
It was extremely realistic, I'm not gonna lie. So is AI something that you're sort of concerned about?
I am, because of, like I said, the idea of AI just copying what's going on and producing whole tracks. Creatively, it's awesome. Some of the stuff you can do, you can take someone singing, strip it from the track, then use another bit of AI and get it re-sung by a virtual singer. I think it's a bit like when they said sampling was going to ruin music. And what they didn't factor in was how creative people could be with it. So it's AI's been with us for years, hasn't it? We've all been using it. It just hasn't been
Mhm.
necessarily called AI. Where it's dodgy is when one of the leading creators has said this could really screw humanity, the evil side of it, the military side of it. I'm more worried about that than the creative side because I think people are onto AI enough where, for instance, say you've got a film and you want some music for AI. So you want some music for the film. They won't touch something that's AI because if it's
Mhm.
AI, then AI could have stolen something from someone else's music that then could haunt the film producers down the line. So they won't want to touch AI. The publishing bodies have already said they won't publish AI. So I think it's a creative thing. If you're just stealing stuff, and I mean, I'm sure you've seen it where people are posting AI on Facebook going, here's my art. And you think, you've just put in a few tag words. That doesn't make it art. But if you use AI as part of what you're doing, it could be fine. If I wanted to do a painting that had a log cabin and a lake in it and got an AI image to inspire me or to visualize what I was thinking and then um, create it with something that to look at is fine. So yeah, it depends whether if it's the end product, then it's naff.
Yeah,
But if you are using it as a tool, then it's every bit as exciting as any other tool. That's my take on it.
interesting. No, I like that take on it. It's really cool. And it's a good point as well, because it's about not relying on it. It's about
Mm.
using it in a way that elevates it, which is interesting. And just sort of touching on the idea of creating art and how that's done and inspirations behind that. You obviously create art yourself.
Mm.
You were involved in music. You still are, but you've pivoted and
Mm.
focused towards art. What inspired you to make that change?
Well, because we were doing music that kind of crossed from analog to digital. For instance, we were using digital photography very early on with the label to take pictures of the artists, etc., etc. And the art side of it was always important. One of the people who worked for me was a brilliant artist, and as you know, you can make videos, and you can take pictures now on your phone, and that are good enough to reproduce and sell. And for me, the art side of it, when music sales collapsed because of the digital world, then something it took away something for me because instead of you having a physical record and a piece of vinyl that you'd go and get mastered and the vibe, it was like sending off a file and getting back a file that would be uploaded digitally. So art became attractive to me because someone could still have something physical, in this case, something to hang on their wall. To make art for me digitally is what I was doing initially, and I still do, but was very much like making a piece of music, but instead of audio tracks that made up a tune, you'd have visual layers that would make up a piece of art. So it seemed like an exciting way to go where the end result was something physical that wasn't just banded around as a file that you can't get that excited about a digital MP3, can you? Or I can't.
Yeah.
So that was a way of carrying on what you're doing, but where you've got something physical to show for it.
Saw that the artwork on the record coming on strong was it mentioned it had the words Y4K on it, and I really liked the way that was designed.
The Coming On Strong Y4K, I think, was a compilation. So I think it was probably because it was part of that. The Coming On Strong logo was a I could say it was inspired by, and I don't even know how you pronounce it, but Moschino, the design, the
Yeah,
fashion.
yeah, yeah.
Is that how you pronounce it?
I think so.
It was their logo, their typeface that we've refashioned for Rhythm Section, and we had it on
Sick.
our M1 tour jackets. And around at the rave days, people were repurposing famous logos in a sort of subversive way. So that came
Nice.
from that, actually.
I really like that.
Good.
Yeah, no, that's sick. I think there's something to be said in that. It kind of fits the vibe of the time for the
Mm.
way you've described it
Yeah.
to be sort of repurposing things in
Yeah.
that way, sort of controversial towards the status quo in that way.
Yeah.
No, no, that's really, really interesting. And so you've kind of dabbled in art now. You've made some really, really cool paintings. Like I saw the one I like was the Scream
Yeah.
station with the headphones on. I think that's really cool.
I've called that the Munchies because of Edvard Munch, the sort of childish
I like it.
drug reference, I guess. Yeah, I've done a few things like that that have been, again, digitally. You can, for me, I'll have an idea and then I will work towards making it a reality. So with that for a while, I thought it would be great to get the Beats headphones and put them on that, because she looks like she's kind of listening to a banging tune,
Oh,
and
that's a really cool
and
interpretation.
it's just the right side of the law, because you're not pretending it's that picture. You are deliberately mucking about with that picture. So touch wood, you can't get into too much trouble for it. But it also does piss off some people, which is quite good as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you can get a reaction like that, then it's a
Mm.
success, I would say. Yeah, I like that way you described layering things. One thing I experimented with visually for the visuals that I create for my friend
Mm.
was taking it was taking pictures of high-rise buildings from Glasgow and removing the background. So basically you had like especially from the 70s and 80s,
Mm.
there was some really sort of oppressive looking photographs of these high-rise buildings and basically create compile them into a montage sort of compilation so that you're flicking through all these different buildings in this way that's almost
Yeah.
2D, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Kind of like a collage almost on video, and then changing the colors of them so they're quite bright, like neonish
Mm.
colors.
Mm.
Then behind that, having like a solid color of that's quite bright also, and it was kind of like contradictory in that way.
Yeah.
You've got these buildings that are super impressive in this way. So I like that. I like the idea of compiling stuff.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, I'll send you some for sure. I'll send you
Yeah, do.
some examples. Um, but yeah, no, that's fascinating. And obviously, you've done art, you've done music. What else has happened in your career? What I want to ask you was how, or rather, has aspects of your career influenced people in a way that was unexpected to you?
That's an interesting one. I mean, I guess I've, let's say, Spain, where I've been DJing for years, like a lot, quarter of a century, and southern Spain has been a huge breakbeat scene forever. So in a kind of fairly obvious sense, I've met lots of people down there who've gone on to, I think I met some guys who I played for, and they seen me when they were 12. They sneaked into a club, and then now they're making breakbeat, and I've influenced that. But I'm not sure with the art. I see the art as quite a newish thing. I've been doing it about 15 years, but I'm not sure whether I could say I've influenced anyone doing that. But with music, it's, I guess, the obvious. Oh, I heard that, and that was an influence to me. So I can't say I haven't got a good story apart from
So good.
that.
Yeah, no, I think that's still a really good answer. And one question that actually I was asked recently that I
Mm.
found really sort of kind of made me look inward. And I want to ask you it, and it was, what has been your hardest lesson that you've had to unlearn?
Yeah,
And
well,
it can be,
I
yeah,
think. Okay, so with music, as technology's gone on, like when we first used to make tunes in the rave days, we only had about 20 seconds of sampling time. So if we were taking beats and bits from bits of audio, we had a tiny amount of audio, and also X number of tracks you could have that would make up a tune. So, for instance, I don't know if you've heard a remix I did of a track called Emit, which was one of my biggest,
I heard that one.
it was like my biggest remix. I was given to do the remix, I was given the Logic is the music program I use, and I was given the tune in Logic, but the guy only had a very cut down version of Logic. So it was like almost like a trial version. So I only had 8 tracks, and actually limiting yourself what you can do with music or art you have to keep remembering where you keep getting more and more bits and more tracks and more complex, and then you'll hear a piece of music that is very simple, and it makes you realize that you have to keep things simple. Like the human ear apparently can only hear 3 different things going on at once. As far as
Interesting.
melodies or whatever, you can only compute 3 things. So if you've got 12 things going on, you can't really hear any one thing. So that track, the remix I did of the Mit, there's only 8 tracks on there because that's all you had. So there's really drums, bass, few sound effects, and a crazy lead noise, and that's it. And yet that was by far the most successful remix I've ever done. I mean, that basically got me gigs around the world, that remix, and I did it very quickly. Doing art, doing music. I think Prince, who I'm a huge fan of, said once that doing great music is about turning off your intellect. So don't make it into an intellectual thing. You do something like loads of tracks in the dance tracks, you'll find out they were done in 2 hours or something really quickly. And Picasso, who's I'm also a huge fan of, has said that every child is an artist. And if you're trying to be an artist, the trick is to stay childlike in what you're doing. So it's not about perfection. Those 2 things mean the same thing. And actually, great art is not, like you don't, people, if you saw a piece of art where someone had recreated photographically perfect a scene, you could applaud their technical skills, but it wouldn't move you. So thing about art, including music, is it's got to move you. And to move you, it's probably got to be quite simple.
Interesting. I like that a lot.
You can use that if you like.
Thank you. No, it's definitely something to consider. Absolutely. I think the simplicity of things, I definitely think there's something to be said about almost in an ironic kind of way that things almost perform or do better when you do spend less time on it. It's quite
Yeah, yeah.
interesting.
Well, apparently it's about you finish something before you start to intellectually analyze. So the piece of music that first got me after rhythm section, the piece of music that first got me international gigs as a DJ was a track I did called A Place Called Acid. So when I mentioned earlier that my first DJ gig in America was quite a big gig, I did this tune. Do you know what a dub plate is?
No.
So you used to be able to, if you did a piece of music and it was on DAT tape, DAT tape, you could take it to a mastering place and they would give you a dub plate, which was from the reggae scene where you could have a one-off record that would last about 10, 15 plays that you could trial out your music in a gig. So it's literally looked like a record, but it was a very quick, rough cut onto vinyl that would onto acetate, it's called. And so again, that tune, I did that in 6 hours, and that was a track that launched me as a DJ. So doing stuff quickly, I'm sure you can afterwards, you can finesse it, but if you
Yeah.
if you're doing it as almost a bit of maths, then it loses something. That's why a lot of
Yeah.
dance music producers, some of them are technically amazing, but they overproduce stuff. So that's a big lesson to learn, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Has there been any highlights of your career? So you've obviously mentioned these tracks that propelled you into this way. Has there been anything else that's been a real highlight for you in your career so far?
Well, yeah, those 2 things were huge. Doing the rhythm section stuff was huge because it was when we went from making demos to releasing music, and playing all the big raves was a massive thing because we realized there was this huge underground following. And along the way, I mean, I've probably made 200 or 300 records, and along the way, there's maybe 10 or 15 that stand out for me that kind
That's
of meant something or introduce you to a new audience. Like the early TCR stuff was, I still stand by it all, but it was quite blokey and quite dark. And so I did a track called Someplace Funky that suddenly people thought I was only about one thing and suddenly opened it up. And with my art, I do a lot of different flavors. I'd say all quite modern, but from primitive to childishly funny, like the Scream ripoff. And I tried not to be too typecast in what I'm doing, because you could have a very good career doing art where you just go down one narrow path and then you're sort of stuck there. So same thing with music now. Now I'm not making music just for clubs. You've sort of got freedom where you can do whatever you want, which is really good.
yeah, no, that's great. I really like that answer. Do you have any advice you would give to your younger self?
Yeah, don't smoke so much weed. I think that would be honest, when we first started doing rhythm section, we all smoked quite a lot. And when you're a bit stoned, you want more and more bass. So the mixing desk, we would gradually make the bass louder and louder and louder and louder. And then you come back the next day and go, shit, why is that bass so loud? You turn it down, then you'd start smoking again and it would gradually creep up. So
Back off again.
yeah, so it was really the bass fader would go up and down and up and down and up and down. Advice, I think enjoy it. I think the when you start getting on the DJing circuit, you get wrapped up in why am I third on the bill? Why am I this? Why am I that? And it's on paper, the idea of DJing is, I think now it's got a bit sort of populist, and I see some DJs doing stuff where it's very gimmicky. Whereas when I first started seeing DJs and stuff, it was dark rooms and people just lost in music and loving it. I think the advice would be just relax and learn to enjoy what's going on, because
Yeah,
it should be enjoyable. Otherwise, it's a bit of a shame because you're not doing a 9 to 5 office job. So that would be my advice.
yeah,
Smoke less weed and chill out a bit. But the trouble is,
yeah.
smoking weed made you chill out. So it's quite hard. It's a bit of a tightrope, that is.
No, I understand exactly what you mean, and I know exactly what you mean. I think that's really good advice. And just on that, kind of you touched on briefly, it's kind of been part of what we've been speaking about just throughout the conversation, and the difference between now and today. The sort of populist angle of DJing. How does it make you feel to see the sort of music scene in the way that it is? Kind of how you would have envisioned it. Does it?
So the populist side, you say you've got DJs where it's sort of a bit about what they're wearing and can they press certain buttons during breakdowns and make it glitchy and sound crazy and etc. And the problem with that for me is, if it's a great tune, you don't need to clown around too much. But DJing has changed where you don't really have to worry about mixing. So you'll see someone playing a DJ set and spending a lot of time dancing around in front of the gear and doing stuff. And it's not
Yeah,
quite the same. It's more of a DJ as entertainer. So I'm glad I'm sort of not really in that world anymore. The really, really sad thing is that music's been devalued. That's
mhm,
where it is now, is on the one hand, say someone my son's age, 25 to 30, they can via the different streaming platforms, they can listen to all sorts of music from the last 50 years, which is brilliant.
yeah,
Can be anything. When I was their age, you had what was on the radio, and there it was mainstream radio, and what was at the record shop, that was it. Now you've got
yeah,
access to anything, but the bad side is, say, Spotify, 60,000 tracks are uploaded every day. So how do you
yeah,
find the good stuff? Musicians not being able to earn a living by releasing their music, apart from a tiny percentage. That's very sad, very sad.
yeah.
If you wanted to be an underground dance producer now, unless you were DJing, you're going to struggle. So I think it's a bit of a shame. I hope it will change, because that side of it, I know scores of really talented music people that have had to stop making music,
Yeah,
and they
no, that
used to
is.
be able to earn a decent living. So that's very sad.
I would agree. Yeah, I would agree. I do hope there's a way back to that, honestly.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, and that devalued point is really interesting. And just lastly, then we've talked around your career and your highlights and your inspirations and your thoughts on where we're at now. And to be honest, I could easily talk to you for a lot longer. I think there's so much more I could talk to you about. It's been really interesting to hear your journey into visual art as well.
Mm.
Something that I find really relatable and inspiring as well. So what have you got coming up ahead in the future? What are you is there things you're looking towards to create or
I'm really enjoying making a variety of stuff and kind of heading back towards my funk roots. So that's quite nice being able to make stuff and work with live musicians as well. Funnily enough, so I got introduced to a Scottish guy who plays all sorts of brass instruments, and he's a jazz guy, but he loves Daft Punk. So
yeah.
I can send him a track and he sends me back a horn arrangement of amazing funk brass. So I'm looking forward to I like the idea of blending real stuff, real musicians with electronic stuff. So I'm doing an out I'm always doing an album, you know, I probably do an album a year at least. I'm doing 2 albums of stuff for a production company to make music that hopefully will end up being synced and say on for TV stuff or film or whatever would be brilliant. I'm
Cool.
constantly doing new art really because doing new stuff is what I like doing. So I've got a couple of art shows on the go. So just to be honest, in the house where I live, I can make music, and a mile away, I've got a great art studio. So I split my time
Yeah.
between doing those two, and I've got a massive internet drug empire that I run as well, the illegal drugs. Which, if I can give you the link to the site, if you could plug it, I'd be
Yeah.
very grateful.
Yeah, no worries at all. The
Um,
least I could do.
yeah, you weren't expecting that, were you? Yeah,
Good.
the last bit is not strictly true, obviously. So, yeah, it sounds a bit dull, but I just like to me personally, I like
No, I
creating
like it.
stuff. The end
Yeah.
result, what you do with it now, I'm not sure, but I'm putting it out there mainly on Bandcamp because you control the price, you can give stuff away. You are, even though you haven't got huge sales, you've got to build up a following, but I'm really enjoying being in control of it all. Same for my art. If I've got a website and you can put stuff out there and gradually spread the word, really.
Awesome. No, I'll be sure to spread the word on my end, absolutely. But thank you, Rennie. It's been an absolute
Pleasure.
pleasure. Yeah, thank you
Nice
so
to
much.
chat.
Likewise.